we there yet? Not much further. Angel and traveller met on the road, chasing a rainbow for a pot of gold. Mum, are we there yet? Not much further. Rainbow, 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 rainbow.
Welcome to the Rene Kassan podcast with me, Wutsia Stremska, the communications manager for Rene Kassan. Rene Kassan is a Jewish voice for human rights and is named after the French Jewish co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our mission is to promote and protect the universal rights of all people, drawing on Jewish experience and values. Rene Kassan works within the Jewish community by building support for human rights values amongst British Jews, in the wider community by bringing the authority of Jewish perspective on issues that resonate with the Jewish experience. The last decade has posed enormous challenges to the human rights that establish a humane, just and dignified life for people reaching British shores. However, an insufficient, unjust and expensive immigration detention system, the criminalisation of refugees reaching the UK through irregular routes, and the absence of any legal and safe routes for those seeking safety are all aspects of policies that have created an ever more hostile environment for migrants and refugees. At Rene Kassan, we believe that the British public and the Jewish community have an important stake in maintaining a domestic protection system for refugees and asylum seekers. Throughout history, the ability to seek refuge has been essential to Jewish survival through the horrors of the Holocaust, led to the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the Convention relating to the status of refugees in the 1951 Refugee Convention. For this reason, we work to challenge the hostile environment towards refugees by advocating for more humane attitudes, effective policy responses, and adherence to international human rights norms. The specific objectives include advocating for safe and legal routes for refugees, promoting a non-custodial alternatives to immigration detention, establishing a time limit on immigration detention, emphasizing the value of existing domestic and international human rights frameworks, and mobilizing the Jewish community to advocate for refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you so much for joining me today, Carenza and Anne-Marie from Women for Refugee Women. And today is also a very special episode as we are talking to Women for Refugee Women about the status of refugee women seeking asylum, but also in immigration detention for 16 days of activism. So because this podcast marks the start of the 16 days of activism, which is gender-based violence, which is a global campaign calling for an end of violence and discrimination against women and girls everywhere, at Rene Kassan, we are shining a light on one of the most overlooked gender-based violence happening in the UK, which is the detention of women and seeking asylum. Many of these women have fled war, persecution, and gendered violence, only to find themselves locked up in a system that re-traumatizes and silences them. So as I mentioned, today we're speaking to Carenza Arnold, who is the
head of campaigns at Women for Refugee Women,
about the realities of detention, the resilience of the women affected, and the urgent need for more compassionate asylum system, along with Anne-Marie, who is a member of their Lived Experience Voices. So together today, we're going to explore how advocacy, storytelling, and solidarity can change injustice, and how we can all take action during these 16 days to stand with women seeking dignity. So as I mentioned, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today on a really, really important conversation, especially today after all the announcements that have come out. I'll start with the first question. So what is the current situation of women in immigration detention? Anne-Marie, would you like to go first?
Okay, that is a really strong question, and it drives like waves in my head and the community, because it is, and in fact, if we think about the announcement this morning by the government to overhaul, like they called sweeping plans to overhaul the refugee protection, it sends waves and say, because the fact that we have been under hostile situations all the time, it's been like for a decade. And whatever has been announced this morning just grounds everything, and we just wonder where the UK is like heading to. Women for Refugee Women has been supporting women in detention for over a decade, and has published numerous reports on women's experience in detention. Most of the women who are detained, they're survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. So detention in its own way is re-traumatizing, because these women, they are separated from their loved ones, and this separation is really devastating mentally and physically, and it's not like supporting their healing. So it's really a big issue, and it is dangerous. It's just causing further harm to the women. And worryingly, the detention is rising, because under the Labour government, downside is almost coming to capacity. So it is really alarming, and there's always there's a gap between the policy and the practice, because something is said, the policy, but the practice is something different. And this is where all these reports Women for Refugee Women has been coming up with, is where we just want to see that whatever policies, is that really what is happening down in the spaces in those, but it's all looks like no one is listening. There was a ban like in 2016, a ban on practice, like male staff like supervising the women. It was 2016. But with the recent report we just published, A Decade of Harm, which was published this year, it is still happening. Women are watched by male staff in intimate situations, which is really alarming, when maybe you're getting dressed, or you are using the toilet, or having a shower, and it is sad. And in fact, the report has like the level of anxiety, women feeling like less human. They're not valued in the society in the UK. You feel hopeless, and the levels of suicide are really increasing. And the worst thing is that 87 of the women who were like in our report, they were detained, but they were released on bail and back into the communities. And so what is the point of like detaining women? What's the point? Because if 87 are released back in the society and they're able to even go forward with their cases, and then it would be better to leave them in the society in the first place, let them be with their loved one, let them find the support in the societies, and then that would be helping them not even getting worse as far as their mental and physical state is concerned, by locking them up when they have come to find a way of rebuilding their lives.
Thank you for giving us that oversight. And I just have one further question: is what other bits within your report has been shown as a really important aspect that politicians and decision makers really need to take into account?
I guess it's what Anne-Marie just mentioned around the pointlessness of women's detention, but also sort of immigration detention more broadly. We are against the detention of everyone, but it's that most people seeking asylum in detention, women in particular, as Anne-Marie just mentioned, up to June this year, 87% were released back into the communities. So detention doesn't serve its stated purpose. It just creates more harm, more trauma, and it's completely pointless and incredibly expensive as well. And I guess one of our main concerns at the moment is that we know the government are sort of chasing the reform vote. They're becoming increasingly more hostile to sort of appease what they think the electorate want. And we know that detention is going to increasingly be part of their immigration plans to forcibly deport people. So we're increasingly concerned about the impact this is going to have on women in particular. Anne-Marie was one of the researchers of the report, which I don't think she mentioned, so she does know it well.
I think everything is in the report, because we've got our report. If there's any more, anyone would want to read about, we've got the link.
I
You
will
can-
link it to the description of this podcast.
Yeah.
Have a look at that as well. I'll move on to the next question then. So, how are refugee women's experiences unique to them as women in detention centres? And in what ways do gender-specific challenges impact their mental and physical health?
To start off with, I think detention, we all know detention is bad for everyone. We don't want to say that it's good for men and bad for women. No, it's bad for everyone. Nobody deserves to be detained when they have come to seek safety, because that is further prison. When you've been in prison, trying to get out of prison, then you come to seek for safety and then you're detained. So that is another prison. But for women, as women, most of the women, as I mentioned earlier, they're survivors of gender-based violence and with all this rape, like everything, gender-based survivors of gender-based violence, and they are uniquely vulnerable to re-traumatization because of the surveillance, the control they are put under, those sudden checks, all these, they trigger problems like they give you flashbacks of what you went through, and it's not something you want to put someone to go through again when they're trying to be, because you'll always think that, okay, I'm now not in that space where I was, I'm in this space. But whatever I'm going through, whatever practices I'm going through in this space, which I would feel is the safe one, where now I don't have to worry. It gives you all those flashbacks, and then you just feel like you're not going to forget, you're not going to get on with your life because you're going through what this reminds you of what you went through. Of course, I mentioned the male supervision. That is something which really undermines our privacy, and it is intensifying the anxiety, honestly. I think there are also barriers to disclosure because some of the women, because especially for those who are claim maybe because of their sexuality, they may not be free to open up to men, especially if they're from their own communities, because some of these men or even the solicitors are from our communities. And this is if you are claim like your issue is about sexuality and it's the problem that made you flee, you wouldn't want to mention it to a person like that one because you don't feel safe to disclose, because we have seen that even here in the community here, our communities still reject us because of that area. Because we've got an example here of from our report, because one of the survivors who were in the detention was saying that they were detained, but then they got support from a solicitor who was from their country, and that was a man. But the person wasn't able to tell them about the sexuality because they were scared and full of ashamed, because they wouldn't want to be opening up to such a person. So, and if you are not able to open up, this will again have a bad impact on your case, because you're going to open up at a later stage and it will affect you. Why didn't you open up at such and such a stage? Because that is which could be really worrying. And there are concerns that the women are now being detained in male facilities, like male detention centers. So these women cannot get the freedom to move around, the freedom to open up, because they're in a male setting. Like Yarzu is primarily for men, but the men, it is not possible for women to open up in a setting that is designed for men. So I think we need the government to have some moral courage and stop chasing all these votes by giving more, bringing up more hostile policies. It's really worrying here.
Definitely. And I think the other unique aspect to women or people that are able to be pregnant as well is obviously pregnancies, right? So there were stories, I remember when we were protesting outside of Manston, for example, where pregnant women weren't allowed the right medical treatment as well. So I just wonder whether within your report or whether you've heard of any other experiences of how pregnant people especially aren't given the right treatment or the medical treatment that they need.
Luckily, I'd say that since we secured the time limit on the detention of pregnant women, which is 72 hours, and this is obviously what the government were trying to erode in the last sort of year or so, but was successfully maintained by sort of campaigning by organisations like ourselves, but many others in the sector, that the detention of pregnant women is now quite rare. So it does show that sort of time limits on detention can work, and it does sort of improve the conditions overall. So there's not that many pregnant women who are detained at the moment, but we have sort of got lots of experience and research on women not being given the medical care that they need whilst detained, including women who are still continuing to be detained after they've been deemed a person at risk and should no longer be detained. And I think that one of the shocking stories that's included in our report is by a woman called Annika, who was she disclosed suicidality while she was detained, and the healthcare staff sort of laughed at her and said, you can say you're suicidal as many times as you like, but you're still going to be deported, so just get over it, like you're wasting my time. So there's lots of instances of people not getting the care that they need for both their physical and mental health, which is of course extremely concerning.
I'm glad in the sense of, the campaign for the 72 hours at least was successful. And as you said, it shows that time limits do work, and therefore we need to in place even more time limits to make sure that people aren't dealing with these horrible circumstances. So just moving on to the next question. Are there alternatives to immigration detention? And if so, what are then, and whether you've seen any successful models or practices from other countries that can also be implemented to support refugee women without resorting to detention?
Well, the best we can, and we've been advocating for that, is that women, detention shouldn't be like happening. Detention should be happening, but community-based alternatives would be the best ones, where people are around their loved ones and they have access to all the organizations that can support them. Because in such cases, there's better engagement for the people to really focus on their cases, understand the processes, and in a better mental state, really, so that when people are not like rotting mentally and physically. So community-based alternatives would be the best ones, because people are in the communities with their loved ones and they are just getting all the support around accessing it as easily as possible. So the models that have been successful, I think between 2019 and 22, in line with recommendations from Stefan Schulz's government commissioned reviews of detention, the Home Office piloted 2 alternative to detention schemes, including one specifically for women seeking asylum, to explore how asylum and immigration cases can be resolved without the use of detention. So participants were supported to make an informed decision about their next steps, including the possibility of returning to their original countries, the countries of origin. So the independent evaluations of these pilots really found out that they were more human and less expensive, more humane and less expensive than the detention. And indeed, there's significant international evidence demonstrating that this type of engagement-focused alternative is not only it inflicts less harm, costs less money, but it's also far more effective at resolving asylum and immigration cases than locking up people in detention centers.
I can add, I guess, just speaking to what we mentioned earlier around the high numbers of women seeking asylum that are released back into the community. In practice, this is what is happening anyway. People are resolving their claims whilst in our community. The detention element is just kind of a pointless and hostile and cruel step in the asylum process that's happening for no reason whatsoever. And we would say that it's not something that we'd necessarily advocate for, but looking at the government as well, that As Anne-Marie mentioned, the community-based alternatives do support people to also engage with return processes if they are going to return back to their country of origin, but it's in a much more humane and compassionate way. So it's definitely something that we'd really push for. And I'd also just mention that we know at the moment that the government are really ramping up immigration detention, and it feels like we can't have this discussion without mentioning the agreement between the UK and France, which heavily relies on detention to operationalise that sort of one in, one out human trade in human lives, essentially. But we already know from women we're supporting in detention under that scheme that they're not able to access legal advice, they're not able to get interpreters to support them with appointments in detention, and they've already been detained for much longer than the scheme sets out. So it doesn't work. And I think if those women were able to be embedded within their communities and getting support from organisations, they would be able to get access to legal advice much more easily. So I think detention also sort of impedes that access to justice that people so desperately need.
But like you said, it's more the government, I feel like, uses a lot of it as a performative act of cruelty to show to the public that they are doing something about refugees and asylum seekers coming over to the UK, but really it's not working, and they're really imprisoning, there's no other kind of words to use against it, the kind of people that actually are fleeing and are, seeking safety, rather than all the horrible rhetorics that I don't want to repeat that they use. So in that sense, I think that what Anne-Marie mentioned specifically is community-based alternatives to allow people to integrate, right, and be able to feel like they're part of a society rather than cast out as other people that aren't welcome, when in fact polls show that most of the UK public does welcome individuals that do come over. So again, it's just used in a kind of immediate media and political way that is completely out of the reality of what people feel. And just really important, because I know you guys work a lot on this as well. The government, especially Labour, right, have promised to halve violence against women and girls by 2030, I think was the plan. So how do you think they can tackle the violence targeted specifically towards refugee women? Because I don't think they included refugee women in their plans.
I guess the first thing to note is that we're actually still waiting on the strategy to be published. This was expected before summer and then previously at the start of autumn, and we still haven't seen that strategy. And I don't know how a government can have such a big commitment within their manifesto as one of their key sort of targets for their government, and yet still not have a strategy in place. We imagine, and we're very much expecting, that the strategy isn't going to go far enough, and it's not going to include women seeking asylum sort of appropriately. But at the moment, everyone is just sort of waiting for the strategy to be announced. Anne-Marie, would you like to speak to sort of the failures that we think we're expecting?
They're promising to have that by 20, whatever date they're saying. And the women they're talking about, we are wondering whether, exactly as Carenza mentioned, whether asylum-seeking women are included. So if it is what they are saying, we just want to say that all in capital letters, that all women should benefit from that, including women seeking asylum, because this means that if you even look at what is happening this morning, it means that people are going to be left in limbo for longer. People are truly not going to be welcomed at all, and this is just a political, and I think, as you mentioned, they're using politics and the media just to make choices that are just creating levels, and if women seeking asylum are not part of that, then it means we've got to tear a system of the women seeking asylum are less women, like less of being women than all other women, which we cannot really afford to accept. So let women seeking asylum also they should commit to it, that they are also included in that.
I think what's really important just to mention is the fact that, when people are left in limbo, that itself is an act of violence and cruelty, because it affects you mentally and physically of not knowing what your claim will be, the stress, the anxiety. I mean, all the way that from suicidal thoughts to anything else and in between.
I was just going to flag that I think it's also not just about women not being included in that strategy, but it's really important to sort of note that the hostile sort of asylum and immigration system in itself systemically puts women at risk of violence. And I think this is something that the government are willfully ignoring. But for example, things like the really low asylum support levels, people being banned from working, substandard and inappropriate accommodation like hotels, they all put women in really vulnerable situations that places them at risk of further like harm, abuse, violence, exploitation. Some of our research has found that women who have been made forcibly street homeless have been raped and sexually abused while sleeping rough. We've seen and heard from women who have been forced to sort of undertake sex work as a result of not being able to meet their basic needs. And this is the reality for a lot of women seeking asylum in the UK. And if the government truly want to tackle violence against women and girls, they do need to make sure they're looking at all women and girls and sort of looking also at where their own policies and practices put women at further risk of harm. And this is something that is really vital, but is really being ignored at the moment.
Because as you mentioned also, a lot of women or individuals anyway, men, women that leave immigration detention centres are then left destitute. They don't have anywhere else to go. So I don't know whether you can speak on about what kind of support can go to people after they leave immigration detention centres as well, and obviously how getting rid of detention as a system itself would prevent all of that from happening.
I guess one of the really harmful elements of detention is that it rips people from their communities, the support systems that they have in place, their loved ones, and very often they will be released from detention somewhere else entirely in the country, far away from their support networks and their loved ones. For some women, they are released into really dangerous situations and destitution. This then breaks down sort of all those community ties and community cohesion. And it means that women are very often left without support. So for example, we've supported women who have been released from detention and their solicitors are no longer able to support them because they've been released elsewhere in the country. We've had women who used to come to our services in person in London and then placed in the north of England. We then need to, be able to connect them to support services up there, but it's really such a damaging and harmful element of detention. And I think that the government in particular don't necessarily think about what happens when people are released from detention. And I've got a quote that I can read from one of the women that we supported who has been detained, and she was released over a year and a half ago. Her name is Annika, and she said, "I'm a different person now. My physical and mental health have been destroyed. I lost my period. I'm still suffering. I'm still in pain." And I think this really speaks to the long-standing impact of detention as well. It's not as though once someone's released, the harm that it's caused dissipates. It really is long-standing and has a really, a huge impact on women's physical and mental health.
It's a lifetime effect, because even, a little aspect that affects you, whether you're in there for a week to however long you are, it does impact you for the rest of your life, which is a really important aspect of it, for which I don't think MPs and politicians really understand. And they don't obviously think about being in those shoes in that sense. So just moving forward onto my last question, what role can community organisers play in supporting and advocating for these women? And what are some of the practical steps individuals can also take to raise awareness and influence policy changes?
Well, the question is the best one. I think they should be the highlight for maybe this, because that is like the point of action, like to see what can we do to tackle all these issues. I think, as you mentioned, community organizations, okay, it's very important for them to provide safe spaces where these women can, all people who have been detained can come and engage, get access to support, get access to information, get access to like how they can recover, how they, and I think for women, it is specifically important because women-only spaces are very important for the women, because then it gives a chance, women especially if they have gone through gender-based violence and they don't want to, they may not be able to really open up in all spaces where we have all the genders, but women-only spaces be very important and very helpful, because I've seen this for myself and from my own experience. There's so much that I've really managed to open up as an individual in this space and my other colleagues, because I go to both spaces, women only, and then other spaces where we have all gender, and the atmosphere and the engagement is different and the support is different, and the way you open up and the way you really get the recovery program and the process. So it's really important, because you are comfortable to open up in the women only and share your experiences, then there you get the right sort of support. I think there is the idea of co-production, where we feel that these organizations need to have the people really driving all these different activities, because all these different campaigns, because you see that these are the people speaking for themselves, and they are part of all the decisions that are being made, and part of the programs that have been designed, right from the program designing, the delivery, the evaluation, and I think this means that people are really getting the support they need, other than being something decided on their behalf. So, because I've been in different spaces where we have been working together with the facilitators of the different activities in this space, and I've found how important it has been. And even when delivering, if I'm standing up and I'm speaking and I'm just, it gives you the real sense, the story, and the real organic nature of that story, and then you really get to understand, other than someone who has not been in my shoes just telling my story. So the idea of co-production is really very important. And I think these community organizations providing spaces like this, again, is not the end, because they work with the people that they support. These are their neighbors. These are people in the community. Maybe you work with some of their friends or their relatives, and your children go to the same school. So they're not strangers. We are just part of the society, as you mentioned, that we also want to belong. We want to feel that we are part of the society, and it's all about the solidarity, where we can all come together and raise this voice about the inhuman treatment of people who are just, that is, maybe Carenza can add something.
I agree with everything that you said. I will add something that's specific to detention, and then something a bit more broadly, given the context of today's announcements. I'd say for women in detention, we often find that women don't know their rights whilst they're in detention, and the detention centres aren't very good at letting women know what their rights are. So I think a really crucial bit of advocacy that organisations can do to support women is ensure they understand what they're entitled to and connect them to the support they need, such as legal advice and good solicitors whilst they're in detention. I also think the role of sort of pastoral and wellbeing support cannot be overlooked. Detention is extremely isolating. For women in particular, Derwentside is in a very remote part of the country, and it's really difficult for women to be visited by their loved ones. So I think being able to be a source of support and someone that's sort of a trusted contact as well is really important. I would also say that something that's very easy that refugee women do is but provide financial support for women whilst they're in detention. So they can, I mean, it's not a shop. I don't want it to feel like it's something that we all are able to do, but they're able to purchase things whilst in detention to support themselves, whether this is sort of hygiene products or a snack. I think the aspect that organisations play in detention is extremely important. I'd say that more broadly, people seeking asylum in the UK are being attacked from all angles at the moment, whether it's sort of the government, those in opposition, whether it's the media. And I think it's really important to highlight how irresponsible a lot of the media are being in sort of whipping up this fear and scapegoating people seeking asylum. And I think a really important role that community organisations can play is exactly what Anne-Marie said around solidarity and support, and sort of raising people up and letting them speak their truth and tell their story, but in a way that's safe for them to do so. And I think given the context of today's announcements, it's also really important because the government starts sort of encroaching on some people's rights, and it paves the way and endangers rights for all of us. And I think that's something that is really important that people know. You know, we either all have human rights, which I know are so vital to Reni Kazan, or none of us have human rights. And at the moment, we're slowly seeing the chipping away of human rights of people seeking asylum, other sort of groups in the UK, like trans people, and it really is a big risk to all of our rights. So community organisations are also really important to sort of hold the government to account, but tell the other side of the story and get the sort of truth out there in a context that is, you know, thriving on myths and disinformation and scapegoating and sort of sensationalist stories. So yeah, that solidarity aspect is really important.
Well, it's exactly what you said with what Reni Kazan especially stands for is everyday rights are for everyone. And it doesn't matter whether, you know, just because some people might think that some people don't deserve rights, that's not at all the case. Their rights stand there in order to protect those that then become minorities within society, which at the moment is refugees. But it could be anyone, because any group can be targeted at any moment. So in order to stand with those rights and ensure that everyone's rights within that context is protected is so important. So standing in solidarity is vital when any rights become infringed in that aspect. And I don't know whether you're pledged to
the Welcome Every Woman pledge. It is.
So, and probably to add something to what Carenza said, I think this one just came to my mind now that no one chooses really to be a refugee at any one time. You don't wake up one day and you say, okay, tomorrow, now I'm just, let me just lead this life. No, it doesn't happen like that. So whatever has happened to us can happen to UK at some stage. So if what is happening to us now could be happening to UK sometime, how would they really feel when they're in the shoes which we in our shoes now? Because you don't decide it is, and if your country was safe, what's the point of going to seek safety when your country is safe? No. So I think maybe everyone, there's a day for everyone it can happen in, and that is something probably which we need to think about, and whatever policies are being put out there, and that one day it could be happening. So UK really needs to uphold the right to seek asylum. Yeah.
I think that is a powerful note to end on. And as I'll just repeat again, to make sure that you sign, individuals, policymakers, anyone signs the Welcome Every Woman pledge, because I think that's one step closer so that individuals can also take to, you know, write to their MP and make sure that this is a topic that is kept being brought up to ensure that refugee women, but also all refugees are protected and ensure that they do have the rights that they do have internationally upheld. So I just want to thank you both again for such a powerful and important conversation on 16 Days of Activism especially, and let's hope that our campaigning does end up going through to some form of justice for refugees and asylum seekers within the UK.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, and let's see where it ends. Otherwise, We are not going to keep quiet. We are just going to keep knocking those doors until the doors are opened. Because if we are still outside, no, we have to get them doors open, and that is why we keep doing what we are doing. And
Mom,